Hi all, this is Simona Rich, and in this video I'm going to analyze the birth chart of John McAfee, whose chart I wanted to do for a very long time, but I just had no time for it. But now I found some time to analyze it, and we don't exactly know the time of birth of John, but it is told that he did tell himself to be Scorpio Ascendant. So there are speculative times for his birth in, I think, astrotheme.com. The birth time is written as 12 p.m. This is my created chart of him in astrotheme.com. In Kepler software, you find his birth time to be this one, and I find this to be more correct. But again, we don't exactly know the birth time, so we just speculate. And the reason I think 11:30 a.m. birth time is more correct is because that puts Lilith in his 12th house, whilst the 12th noon birth would put his Lilith in 11th. And I think it just sounds more right to put Lilith in his 12th house, because this would make his mind quite dark, like he may have many negative thoughts and emotions, and also dreams of violence and maybe even sexual violence and other bad dreams. And in order for him to escape from that dark psyche, he would want to be in the limelight with many friends, always people in his life, so that he just doesn't need to pay attention to that darkness in the psyche. And this can lead to also sexual addictions or obsessions, as well as the need to use mind-altering substances. And these are all the truthful statements about the life of this individual. So I do believe that Lilith should be in the 12th house, whilst if it's Lilith in 11th house, it would be more like that as a child he was bullied. And I don't think it was the case, but I don't know. I don't know almost anything about his life, but I don't think he looks like a child that was bullied. I think he may be the one more like, maybe not a bully, but someone who really stood up for himself. And Lilith in the 11th house would also give a person, would also show a person who would try to create some kind of disharmony in a group of friends, maybe use some manipulation, or like talk behind the backs of people. And I just don't see him as that kind of individual. So I would place Lilith in the 12th house for this reason. And we can see that Lilith here is in the 29 degrees of Libra. This is a degree, 29 degrees of any sign isn't good for any planet. It shows that the person is unable to learn some lesson of past lives, and that lesson may have been repeated over previous lives, and it's just hard for that person to learn that lesson. So they always keep repeating the same mistakes, whatever that placement indicates. So here we see that it's in the psyche, in the 12th house, again indicating past life. And it's in Libra, so it's about relationships with other people as well as the perception of oneself. So this placement would indicate that he doesn't see himself as worthy of love, as a beautiful person, and this probably leads to many insecurities. And to cover these insecurities and to prove himself worthy of love and admiration, such people with Liliths in Libra, especially if it's in the 29th degree, would really seek publicity. They will want to be in the public eye. They would do whatever it takes to stay relevant or to be written about, so that they're always seen, because these people also have a fear of being alone. And when it comes to relationships, they would choose individuals for them that are not suitable, because their priority is not that one should find a matching mate, but their priority is to find someone who will not leave them, someone who will admire them, someone who would stay with them for a long time, someone who would be unable to separate from them. And usually when you have priorities as such, you are likely not to find a suitable mate. So this placement shows inequality of relationships, and it's likely that once such mate is chosen, he will be the one carrying the burden of relationships, trying to harmonize it, because that other person may be not that invested in keeping the relationship harmonious. So that's what Lilith stands for in Libra, especially in the 29th degree. And this has shown that these failed life lessons he's taken into this life, and it's very difficult to learn the lessons when this object, planetary object, is stuck in this degree. Now moving to his ascendant, which is Scorpio, it shows that he is a very intense person, emotionally intense person, that he puts all of his essence into what he does, and he tries to figure out how things that interest him work, and he may try to improve them. And maybe that's how his virus software was born. This is the sign of secrecy, and the traditional ruler of Scorpio is actually placed in the Scorpio ruled house of secrecy in his chart, whilst the current ruler of Scorpio is placed in the 9th house, which is again very suitable for him, actually both of these placements, because when it comes to the traditional ruler, he does talk a lot. He did talk a lot about the need for privacy, and of course his whole career was born out of him trying to maintain the privacy of people through his antivirus software. Whilst when it comes to the current ruler of Scorpio, Pluto, it's found in the house of education and travel, and he was a very intelligent person. I don't know if he got educated in some formal institution or it was self-education, but he was a very, very intelligent person. And I read that he moved with his family in childhood to, I think, the USA from England. So this kind of placement, the chart ruler being placed in the 9th house, could indicate someone who permanently relocates far from their home where they were born, and someone that could be interested in education. Sometimes people who are pilots, for example, have such a placement too, because it shows long distance travels. And since the ruler of the chart is placed in the royal sign of Leo, whilst his sun is in a service-oriented sign of Virgo, that blends two of these quite opposite influences together to produce someone who is not afraid of very detailed work, and they can work in a very accurate manner, yet they're not too happy to stay out of the limelight. So they will try to make themselves much more visible than if such a Leo influence wouldn't be present and only Virgo influence would be there. We can find that his Mercury is in the sign of Virgo too, making his mind very bright. And we can find that it's in square aspect to Uranus. And this produces actually any kind of touch of Uranus to Mercury, even if it's a negative ray, is actually good for the mind because it increases intelligence. Yet, of course, if it's a trine or a sextile, it's much better. Yet still, this makes him above average, definitely above average in his intelligence. And we can see that there is also no affliction from the sun coming to Mercury, which is again excellent. So he is definitely expert at what he does, and he can master very complicated subjects. If this placement, if this time of birth is correct, this would place midheaven in conjunction with the royal star Regulus, which again would definitely suit him, because he is someone who comes across as an authority, someone who is very powerful, like meant to rule. That's the vibe that I get from him, and I think that Regulus might definitely be involved. We can find, and we are jumping all over the place, but this is just how my mind works. We find that Venus is also in the sign of Leo in the 9th house, and actually, according to this chart, the ruler of his house of union is Venus, and that's one of the reasons why I don't know if this chart is correct, because this is I think it's the only really placement that is a bit strange for me, because this kind of placement would indicate a woman that is absolutely glamorous, like a wife that is very good looking, glamorous wife, very much into wealth, and having much magnetism and beauty. And from his choices of mates, I don't see that. So that's one of the reasons why I was a bit unsure about this birth time, yet I stuck to it because other placements look fine. But the accurate description of this placement applying to him is that the wife can be foreign, and yes, he usually would go, from the pictures that I saw, for women of different races, women who were, I think they were foreign, or either foreign or of different races to him. And this placement would also show that Venus being in Leo, it would show that he showers his mate with affection, and it's very likely that he would buy many gifts to the mate and make his love felt through his generous actions towards the partner. Now, looking at Saturn in the 9th house, this would show that the mind is very orderly, that beliefs are right, based on truth, and down to earth. The Sun in sextile aspect to Saturn gives more strength to the character and reliability, which is necessary because his Uranus really affects his mind, which can give instability. So this is good that he has that stabilizing influence. Two malefics, Saturn and Mars, are placed in the sign of Cancer, representing his family, showing definite problems in the family. And I read that he had a father who was very violent and alcoholic. So that is represented here by these two malefics in the sign ruling the family, and also that Mars is in very tight aspect to Neptune and Jupiter conjunction, which can produce very big addictions. So already in the family there were very big addictions, and he inherited that because he himself was addicted to drugs, and he didn't even hide that. The placement of Mars in the 8th house also can show sudden death, which is even more confirmed by Uranus being in the house of death too, which can give sudden death that is completely not expected. And that was probably the case with him, because as a result of not paying taxes and being very public about it, he eventually was hunted down by the government and killed, and it was told that he committed suicide. But people who knew him knew that he would never ever do that, and he was happy at the time, just hours before his death. So definitely he was killed. Interestingly, his Saturn conjuncts Pollux, which is a star that can give violent death. And we see that Saturn is not placed in a good sign for it, yet it's not afflicted in other ways. But the star is powerful. Sometimes fixed stars can have very powerful influences, and in this case it was true. And we don't know, maybe his Saturn was even in the 8th house. It could be in the 9th, but it might be in the 8th also, which would indicate even more that death would be of a violent nature, but also afflicted Mars indicates that too. Now, moving back to Uranus in the 8th house, it can give a partner who misuses the funds, who spends a lot, and it's the case also with Mars being there too. So joint funds would probably be a source of misfortune for him. Now going to his 3rd house, we find a very important planet making quite a few connections to the planets in the upper part of the chart, which shows that his emotions, his mind has huge influence on his life, and this kind of placement can give fame, because Moon stands for publicity and it's a very important planet in his chart. The connections that the Moon makes show that he is a highly imaginative person. He would think in pictures. He may be even seeing visions about how about the potential of humanity, or how he can improve the life of humanity. And freedom was extremely important for him. And Uranus, which is responsible for the need of freedom, is placed in the house of privacy. And interestingly, he did create an antivirus software. So it's basically giving people freedom in their privacy time of browsing. So this is so interesting how astrology shows that in symbols. And Uranus is also placed in the sign of communication, Gemini, and computers are ways to communicate with each other. Going back to the Moon in the 3rd house, this can make a person very talkative, and since it's placed in Aquarius, it would make his mind very broad, not seeing different races, not discriminating between different countries. He just sees humanity as a whole, and he has very broad views, highly accepting and very friendly. Look at the connections, positive connections that the Moon makes to the 11th house of friends and groups, to Uranus, which represents people, to Gemini, which represents young people, communication. So basically this person is so communicative, he is so friendly, so obviously he easily makes friends, and that's why the videos that I've seen of him, he's always with someone, always with people. Yet there is an affliction to his Moon, and it's quite a tight affliction to Pluto, and this shows a side of him that could be compulsive, like being unable to control emotions. Emotions are so powerful in him that he may be unable to sometimes control some urges and some emotions, and he needs to do something in order to work off that excessive emotional energy. Moon's opposition to Pluto shows that the emotions are destructive. This indicates that there could be tendencies towards cruelty, the need to dominate, and there could be violence outbursts. And once he feels emotionally unstable, what can really help him is to be with friends. But since his house of friends is connected to the negative Mars influence, it's likely that this actually, whenever he goes to friends, they are really nice people, lovely people, yet they are also likely to be addicts. So he was unable to quit because probably the friends were encouraging that in him, that addiction. Now I would like to discuss something about the 5th house, because he told I read that he told that he has many secret children, that probably he is the father of many children. And it's so interesting because his 5th house is ruled by Mars, which is placed in the house of secrecy, in the sign of family. And it's also connected to Libra in a negative way, which shows unusual relationships, especially with friends. So this can paint quite an interesting story and can confirm that he may indeed be the father of many children. He felt really good in the company of people, and actually friends probably would not only help him emotionally but also financially. And it's shown that his friends were creative people, also like him, very imaginative, and that it is also shown, looking at these 2 houses, the 3rd and the 11th, that one of the ways that he would become happy and prosperous is using his mind to achieve the goals that would help humanity. And actually, yes, he did create an antivirus software which made life easier for people, protected their documents, privacy, and so forth. And finally, I would like to say that the reason I first became interested in doing his chart is because when I found out about this person, I got the feeling that the vibration of his being is very similar to that of my father. So I thought I should check his birth time, and it turns out that he was born just 3 days after my father was born on the same year. So you see how amazing it is that this particular planetary signature was so strong, so specific, that I was able to feel that it's nearly identical to that of my father, though the moon's location is different. And interestingly, although I didn't know the birth time of my father, I put, according to the calculations that I've made, his ascendant in Scorpio too. So when I compared these charts, my father's and his, I found many similarities. So I actually understand where John McAfee is coming from, because my father had very similar issues. So it's like they are driven by something that is dark in the psyche, and they are unable to stop that. Very intense unsolved issues from past lives drive their powerful personalities towards destruction. And my father probably was even more destructive than him, but he also was the person that did much good, but he was also a very troubled individual. I did love his teachings, because you see his birth chart ruler is in the house of teaching, the 9th house, and the moon is in the 3rd house of communication. So he was such an excellent teacher, and he taught people, look at his moon, about how to free themselves. Look at the connections that the moon makes to connection that the moon makes to Uranus. So he taught people how to become free from the system, but because of his pride, Pluto placed in Leo, he got into trouble and he was killed. He was not ashamed of his lifestyle, though he understood that some of the things he did was wrong, like using drugs. But he was such an open individual, and I think that openness is because of his moon's location. Otherwise, as Scorpio rising, they may not be so open. But I find that you can learn from any person, either good things or bad things, how to do things or how not to do things. So I actually encourage people to listen to his interviews, and there are just a few, unfortunately, just a few of them on YouTube. But he basically exposes the system, how it works, and how to escape from it. And because of his public teaching of how to escape the system, he was actually killed. Fortunately, he lived a very long time. I think he died when he was 74. I may be mistaken. Let's check. 75 years. He died at 75. So at least he lived a full life and he experienced total freedom. And though he did have addictions, he lived a life that I think is much, much more interesting than most people because he was not afraid. He lived according to how his heart wanted. He was out of the slavery to the system completely through cryptocurrencies. So I find him to be a great teacher, and if you can overlook the fact that yes, he did have addictions and some dark traits, I think you can, many people, most people would be able to learn a great deal from this very, very intelligent person. So this is all that I have for you for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day. Take care.